A common objection to the existence of a creator begins with a philosophical paradox. If something cannot come from nothing, how could a creator make the universe from nothing? This supposed paradox rests entirely on a specific ontological premise. It assumes that the transition from nothing to something is a logical impossibility, regardless of whether a causal agent is present. Look at this rendering of an empty void that suddenly erupts into a complex network of particles. A true absolute void contains no potential and no causal conditions. It is irrational to assert that a highly ordered, finite universe could spontaneously emerge from absolute non-being without any prior causal activity. Our objective is to systematically map the causal chain of reality. By tracing the existence of our finite universe backward, we will test the logical necessity of an uncaused, uncreated creator. This is Richard Dawkins, a prominent figure in the new atheist movement. Critics of theism often argue that asserting creation from nothing implies the creator itself must be nothing, or that the concept is a logical contradiction. To evaluate this, we must strictly define our terms. Nothing means an absolute absence of reality, zero potential, zero material, and zero causal conditions. When classical philosophical traditions describe creation ex nihilo, creation out of nothing, they are stating that there was no pre-existing material stuff. They do not assume an absence of causal conditions or potential. This leads to our central investigation. If the universe did not emerge from a pure void, we must determine if an ultimate agent provided the causal conditions necessary for existence through the application of will and power. We begin with a verifiable axiom. The universe is finite. All finite things possess a specific boundary where they emerged into existence. To explain this emergence, we must test the first theoretical pathway, the hypothesis that the universe simply created itself. The verb to create refers to a precise transition. It describes an entity moving from a state of non-existence into a state of existence. For an entity to create itself, it would require the power to act before it existed. It would have to exist and not exist at the exact same time. This animation illustrates the logical contradiction. A shape cannot draw its own outlines if its core geometry is not yet there to hold the pen. The concept of self-creation fails because it requires an effect to precede its own cause. A common counterargument, often raised in humanist debates, points to biology, specifically that asexual reproduction in single-celled organisms is a form of self-creation. This biological comparison ignores the mechanics of cellular division. Asexual reproduction strictly requires a pre-existing parent organism to transfer genetic material. The offspring relies entirely on a prior physical cause. It does not conjure itself from non-existence. Self-creation violates linear logic. Because a finite entity cannot author its own initial existence, the universe could not have caused itself. This forces us to deduce an external cause. This brings us to the second potential pathway, the idea that the universe was created by something else that was also created, which in turn was created by another. Philosophers call this an infinite regress of causes. It is an endless backward chain where every cause is dependent on a preceding cause. This diagram shows a military sniper waiting to fire. He radios backward to Command HQ for permission, but HQ must ask their superior. If this chain extends infinitely, the order is never given. The sniper waits forever. There is no terminal command. We can apply this exact constraint to cosmology. If Universe 1 requires Universe 2 to exist, and Universe 2 requires Universe 3, stretching back forever, the final condition for existence is never met. Universe 1 would never materialize. This highlights the logical trap in the question, who created God? It forces an infinite regress where a terminal cause is strictly required. This is Professor John Lennox. He notes that the very phrasing of this question reveals a categorical error in the questioner's mind. By asking who created God, you are applying the physical laws of a created, finite universe to the uncreated reality that authored those laws. A created God would be subject to the very regress we have just shown to be impossible. Because infinite regress results in a logical collapse, the only viable terminus for existence is an uncaused, uncreated first cause. Having established the necessity of a first cause,
we can deduce the specific attributes this cause must possess, starting with transcendence. When a carpenter builds a wooden chair, he does not become the chair. The architect is distinct from the materials of their system. Therefore, the creator of the universe must be entirely distinct from the universe itself. The second attribute is immense power. The observable universe contains roughly 10 to the power of 80 atoms, each representing vast potential energy. Bringing a system of this magnitude into being requires a cause with power at least equivalent to the staggering energy of the universe it produced. This brings us to a frequent objection, the omnipotence paradox. It asks, can God create a stone so heavy he cannot move it? To resolve this, we must define omnipotence accurately. It refers to the ability to realize every possible state of affairs. It does not include the ability to fail or to perform a logical contradiction. Asking an all-powerful entity to create a stone it cannot move is the linguistic equivalent of asking it to create a square circle. A square circle is a meaningless contradiction. It has no informative value and no reality to manifest, even for absolute power. The inability to perform a logically impossible, meaningless action is not a failure of ability. It is simply a limit of human language. The first cause must be transcendent and powerful, entirely unbound by the semantic wordplay that attempts to define its limits through logical contradictions. This leaves a final deductive question. If the eternal first cause holds the power to create, what caused it to initiate the universe at all? This requires the creator to possess a conscious will. We can understand this by looking at two different types of explanations, scientific and personal. Think about the everyday process of making a cup of tea. Science explains how the water boils through thermodynamics and molecular movement, but physics cannot explain the why. Only personal choice explains the intent. The universe, similarly, requires an agent who chose to act. Some object that causality requires time, and since time began at the Big Bang, there was no before for a cause. They argue that without time, there can be no cause. This assumes all causality must be temporal. In philosophy, we recognize atemporal causality, where a cause and its effect occur simultaneously, without one preceding the other on a timeline. Consider this thought experiment: a heavy sphere resting eternally on a soft cushion. The sphere is actively causing the indentation in the cushion. However, if both the sphere and the cushion have existed for eternity, the cause never temporally preceded the effect. They exist in a simultaneous causal relationship where time is not a factor. We can apply this to the origin of the universe. The moment the creator exerted its will was the exact moment the universe emerged. The cause and the effect occurred simultaneously at the boundary of time. The first cause is not a blind mechanistic force, but a conscious agent whose choice perfectly resolved the boundary of time and causality. This logic tree charts the sequence we've built. By mapping the universe's finite nature and discarding semantic noise, we've systematically closed off the impossibilities of self-creation and infinite regress. Because the universe exists and dependencies must terminate somewhere, we're left with a single valid outcome. The existence of our finite universe mathematically and logically demands an uncaused, uncreated creator. This creator must logically be transcendent of the system it built, eternal in its existence, possessing a magnitude of power sufficient for the cosmos, and holding a conscious will to initiate reality. To understand our reality, we must look past intellectual cliches. When we apply rigorous first-principle stress tests to our fundamental assumptions, the necessity of an uncreated creator becomes a rational certainty.